Hello, I'm Patricia Minikon. I'm an immigration attorney with the immigration firm of Minikon Law, LLC, located in Greenbelt, Maryland. Today, I'll be talking to you about the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, commonly known as DACA. First, I'll take you through the history of DACA, and then we'll talk about the eligibility factors. And finally, I'll go through how to complete the forms. DACA was first put into law by President Obama through executive action. Anyone who receives deferred action through DACA is able to remain in the US and obtain work authorization. After President Trump won the elections, they ended DACA, and then lawsuits followed challenging that. The first court order issued January 2018 indicated that the government could not end DACA. The Supreme Court ended up hearing 3 of the challenges to DACA and issued its decision in June of 2020, finding that the Department of Homeland Security violated the Administrative Procedures Act, which requires agency decisions to be reasonable and not arbitrary and capricious. Following the Supreme Court decision, Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf penned a memorandum requiring that the DACA program end to any new applications. Also indicated that the work permits and periods of DACA for persons who already had DACA would be shortened to a year. In November of 2020, the U.S. District Court in New York ordered the government to reinstate DACA as it existed before it was terminated in September of 2017. And in December 2020, the U.S. District Court in New York also nullified the Wolf Memorandum, meaning that DACA had to be issued in banks of 2 years, and work authorization also had to be issued for 2 years. After President Biden was elected, he also put out a memorandum stating that the Department of Homeland Security and USCIS needed to strengthen and fortify DACA. So that's where we are today. As of December 7th, due to the court order, USCIS is now accepting first-time requests for DACA. It is also accepting renewal requests for DACA. And, which is a big change from the Wolf Memorandum, it is now accepting applications for advanced parole. Advanced parole is where someone needs to travel due to an urgent situation, and the advanced parole allows that person to leave the US and to return to the US and resume their DACA status. The USCIS is also providing persons who received 1 year work authorization and 1 year grants of DACA status. They will be providing them with evidence showing that the work authorization and DACA status are now extended by another year for a total of 2 years. So what are the eligibility factors if you're filing for an initial grant of DACA? First, you had to be under 31 years of age as of June 15 of 2012. It doesn't matter how old you are today, you can still apply if you meet all the other factors in addition to age. You had to have come to the United States before reaching your 16th birthday. You have to have continuously resided in the United States since June 15 of 2007 up to the present time. We'll talk a little bit more about what continuously resided mean in the future slides. You also have to have been present in the United States on June 15 of 2012, and you have to be present in the United States at the time you apply for DACA. and you could not have had lawful status on June 15, 2012. Now, you also needed to, or you need to either be currently in school or have graduated or obtain a certificate of completion from high school. If you've obtained a GED, that would be acceptable as well. Or if you've been honorably discharged from the armed forces or the Coast Guard, that would also suffice. You also cannot have been convicted of a felony, a significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more misdemeanors. And you cannot pose a threat to the national security or public safety of the United States. We will discuss all of these eligibility factors. When the requirement says you must not have had status on June 15th, that means you either never had lawful status on or before June 15th, 2012, or any lawful status that you had, or if you were paroled into the United States, it had to have ended as of June 15th, 2012. So never ever having DACA status means you may be entered without inspection. I'm sorry, never ever having lawful status means you entered without inspection. And so from day one, when you entered, you did not have status. If you had status, that status had to have ended. For example, some people came in with their parents on like a work visa, and they qualified for that visa until they were 21. If they were more than 21 years of age and had aged out of the benefits, they would also qualify. If you entered though in say student status, and in your passport and on your I-94, it says D/S for duration of status, that will bar you from obtaining DACA unless an immigration judge or USCIS had issued a final determination telling you your status was terminated. So persons who had duration of status on June 15th, 2012, and who had not been notified officially that that status had ended, would not be able to apply. Currently in school, you need proof of enrollment and proof of participation. Not being a threat to national security or public safety has not been defined. However, gang membership, trafficking in persons for labor purposes, criminal activities, and participating in activities that threaten the US, which could be gleaned from your social media posts or other activities online, would qualify and would serve to bar you from being able to apply for DACA. The requirement of continuous residence. Your certain absences will not prevent you from being approved for DACA if it was on or after June 15, 2007, but before August 15, 2012. And the absence was short, reasonably calculated to accomplish the purpose. Absence was not because of an order of exclusion, deportation, or removal. And the absence was not because you received an order of voluntary departure and you left before you could be placed in removal proceedings. And the purpose of the action and your actions outside the US were not contrary to law. Short absences are usually no longer than 90 days. Some key points to remember about filing for an initial DACA. Non-renewal of your initial DACA for more than 1 year means that you have to file again for an initial grant of DACA. So if you've had DACA for 2 years or more and you did not renew it, you would need to, if you did not renew it for more than a year, you'd need to file again as if you were filing an initial application. The difference between most initial and renewal applications is that for the renewal, you're simply sending in documents that would be new, that you didn't send in for the initial. So if you're filing for a renewal, or you're eligible for a renewal and have not filed, and your DACA has expired for more than a year, you have to file as if it's an initial application. If you did not renew your DACA and it's been expired for less than a year, you can still file for renewal DACA, and you don't need to send in all of the documents you sent in before for your initial grant. If you've never been in removal proceedings, you need to file, you must be 15 years of age or older. This applies even if removal proceedings were terminated. You still need to. However, if you are currently in removal proceedings, or if you've been deported before, granted voluntary departure and never left, if the immigration judge administratively closed your case, or you're currently in immigration detention, you can apply at any age. And if you're in immigration detention, you would just let your officer know that you're eligible for DACA, and that is how you go about it. You do not apply with USCIS. Now, in order to qualify for DACA, even as an initial applicant or as a renewing applicant, you cannot have been convicted of a felony, which is a crime punishable by a year or more in jail. You can have up to 3 misdemeanor convictions. And misdemeanors are any crime or are crimes punishable by 6 days up to a year in jail. You cannot be convicted of a significant misdemeanor and be sentenced to serve more than 90 days in jail, or even if there's no jail time, the offense cannot be one for domestic violence, sexual abuse or exploitation, burglary, unlawful possession or use of a firearm, drug distribution or trafficking, or driving under the influence. So even though a crime is not a felony, there are certain categories of misdemeanors that are considered significant misdemeanors. I suggest if you have any questions about a criminal conviction or criminal record, you reach out and consult with an immigration attorney so that you know whether you qualify for DACA or not before you ever apply. So, eligibility for renewing your DACA application. There are also guidelines. You have to meet the initial guidelines and be granted your initial bank of DACA. And then you need to not have departed the US on or after August 15th of 2012 without advance parole. Remember, we talked about advance parole being permission to leave and return. And then you need to have continuously resided in the United States since you submitted your request for DACA. And you cannot have been convicted of a felony, significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more misdemeanors. And you cannot pose a threat to the national security or public safety of the US. And you needed to still have been in the US on June 15 of 2012. And again, at the time you make your request for your DACA renewal. So renewing DACA, there are some key points to keep in mind. If you have any new convictions, you need to send in your certified disposition with your renewal application. You need to take care to assess whether you're still eligible for DACA given your new conviction. Certified dispositions are usually court documents showing what you were charged with, what punishment the judge ordered, or what happened in the case, whether it was dismissed, or you were convicted or pled guilty. Certified copies usually have a stamp or seal from the court. Now, if your conviction was a result of juvenile proceedings and the court where it happened prohibits the release of those records, then you don't have to submit it. You have to disclose it, but you can indicate that, your state prohibits the records, and you're sometimes able to get a letter actually that says that it's not released. Now, when do you file? If you're eligible for initial DACA, you file anytime. But if you're eligible for renewal DACA, you have to file 150 days prior to the expiration of your current period of DACA in order to receive the new approval for your DACA in time and before your current DACA expires. You do not want to file less than 120 days before your DACA period expires, because you may not receive your approval in time or your work permit in time. Now, because USCIS is now accepting applications for advanced parole, which would allow you to travel for humanitarian reasons or for work, or for other pressing reasons, you need to wait until your DACA is approved. So you need to factor that in to any planning for the trip that you're making. So after your DACA is approved, then you can apply for advanced parole. You cannot apply for the advanced parole when you send in either your initial request for DACA or your renewal request for DACA. So what forms do you need to file? You need to file 3 forms. The first is the I-821D, which is the application for DACA status. The second is the I-765, which is the application for employment authorization. And the last form is the I-765WS, which is the worksheet that goes with the employment authorization. You want to mail all completed forms to the filing address for the I-821D. Now, I'm not providing an address in this presentation because the mailing addresses change from time to time for USCIS. And so what you want to do is to go to the website, uscis.gov, and go to the form I-821D. And on the page with the form, if you scroll down, you'll see a link that says filing address or where to file. And once you click on that, it will give you information as to where to file the forms. So how do you complete the forms? I will talk a little bit about what you will see when you go to the forms, and just go through quickly what you want to focus on as you're completing the forms. This is being recorded live, and so I am waiting for the forms to load. So when the first part of the form, I'm just going to go ahead and start talking about it. The first part of the form asks for your name, information about your entry, etc. You want to provide that information, and you want to be using your passport when you're doing this. And actually, before you even get to filling in your name, you want to select whether it's an initial request or a renewal request. And then you fill in your name, your address. They also want to know about whether you're in removal proceedings. If you have questions about that, you may want to speak with your parents to see if maybe if you entered at the border, you may have been placed in removal proceedings, but you were too young and do not remember. Next, if you have an A number, you would if you were placed in removal proceedings. They want you to put that there. If you've received DACA before or some other status, you may have a social, and you can put that in there. Then they ask for information about you, city, town, country of birth, country, of residence, which would be the US, and where you are citizen, which country you're a citizen of. Then they ask about your description and any travel where you've lived, if you've traveled before, and that's where I said you might need your passport. And then it asks again for travel information, residence and travel. So when you're completing the form, keep in mind the eligibility requirements for DACA, and the requirement that you have continuously resided in the US. So that's what some of these questions are going to. And then it says for initial request, you initially arrived and established residence in the US prior to age 16, and you'll say yes, and then they want to know your initial entry date, because it has to reflect a date that would be prior to you turning 16. You also have to provide your place of initial entry into the United States, and that, again, if you were too young, ask your parents for that information. And then immigration status on June 15th, 2012, like we talked about, if you had no lawful status, if the status you had expired, or any parole had expired. If you were duration of status, you had status on June 15th of 2012. Then the form requests educational information, military service, if that is the case. And then the criminal history. This is where it's asking, have you ever been arrested or charged or convicted with a felony or a misdemeanor? And then they specifically include juvenile court matters, but not including minor traffic violations, unless they were alcohol or drug related. So if you have one arrest for driving without a license, that would not count as ever been arrested, charged, or convicted. And then they ask again, have you ever been arrested, charged, or convicted in any other country besides the United States? And they want information for that. Anytime you answer yes, you must include certified court disposition, and everything that's related to that conviction. And then they ask, have you ever been a member of a gang? Have you ever ordered, incited, assisted, or otherwise participated in any of the following: killing, severely injuring people, torturing someone, committing genocide, or human trafficking? And then they ask if you've ever helped to recruit someone under the age of 15, basically recruiting child soldiers. Have you ever had sexual contact against someone's will? So those are all questions you need to answer. And then you certify. If you're not fluent in English, you need to have an interpreter read it to you. And that interpreter has to complete their information as well. You are the requester, so you would sign here and put your contact information down. The interpreter will also put that down. If you have a lawyer or someone helping you prepare the request, that person has to complete the preparer's information. So that is how you complete the form. Now, that is the form for your DACA status. The next form is the work authorization form. And while that is loading, I'll just go ahead and launch the worksheet as well, so we don't have to wait any longer than is necessary. Okay, so this is the application for work authorization. It asks whether it's initial, a replacement, or a renewal. So if you're filing for initial DACA, you would select initial permission. If you're filing for renewal DACA, you would select renewal permission. And then your name, again, if you've used any other names on any documents, maybe you dropped your second last name, for example, or you've dropped your middle name. You want to put all iterations of your name that might appear on different documents. And then your US mailing address, you could put your mail in charge of or in care of someone if, say, your mail is not secure at your home. And then they want to know if the mailing address is the same as your physical address. So if that is yes, you would check yes. If it is no, you check no and then provide your actual physical address below. Again, they're requesting an A number. If you have a USCIS online account, you would put that number in, indicate your gender, marital status, and indicate whether you've ever filed previously for a work authorization on this form I-765. Now, if you're applying for initial DACA, you can check here so that the Social Security Administration will send you a Social Security card in the mail about 2 weeks after you receive your work authorization document. And if that is the case, you would need to fill in your parents' names. Just always read the questions carefully, because like most of these will say, if you answer yes, go to item number X. And if you answered no, go to another item number. So you want to, pay close attention to that. And then the form asks you to provide your country of citizenship or nationality. You would indicate on the next page your place of birth and information about your last arrival in the United States. If your arrival was such that you used your passport to enter, you want to get that information and put it in here. If you entered without inspection, then you would skip 21A to 21C and just fill in the date you arrived, starting at number 22, place of arrival, and the immigration status. If you came without a visa, it would be no status. You just put the visa type. Again, looking in your passport will help you determine which visa type you entered with. And then your current immigration status or category, you would indicate what you have. For most, it might be no status, especially for initial DACA applicants. If you're applying for a renewal, you would just put DACA recipient. Even though this form is used for many different categories, including F1 student work authorization, because if you can fill in number 26, chances are you will not qualify for initial DACA, in that if you were in student status with a student visa and you have a service number, you probably are not without status as the requirement mandates. And your eligibility category, when you look on the form instructions, and you can obtain your eligibility category from there. It does indicate the different categories, and you would put it there. Usually it is a letter followed by a number, and that's what would go up there. It's not a STEM OPT, so you would leave all of these from number 28 through going through to the next page in the 30s. You would leave all of that blank. Again, like I said, you just want to pay attention to what the form instructions indicate you should do. And then the applicant's statement, contact information, declaration. You also want to pay close attention to what your DACA code is, and make sure that if that core code is asked for on the application, that you're providing it. So now, the final form you'll be dealing with is the I-765 worksheet. Now, if you're applying, and the form says it, if you are applying for employment authorization under the C-14 deferred action or C-33 consideration for deferred action for childhood arrivals, you need to complete this worksheet. So for the work permit that we just discussed, the code is C-33, and that would go here. You would put the lowercase c here and the number 33 in the second box. You would leave the first box blank. And then on page 4 of the form, I'm just going through, you would note that none of these questions pertain to C-33. So you would, leave them and just move on to completing your statement, checking the relevant boxes, whether you understand English or an interpreter needs to be involved. And then the interpreter, you would indicate that the interpreter read to you every question and indicate in which language in this box. If you had someone prepare this, you would check this box as well and put the preparer's name here, who prepared it for you, put your contact information, and then you want to sign. All right, now back to the worksheet. You will complete your full name, your current annual income. If you don't work right now, it would be 0. Your expenses, though, you would fill in whether you're paying for them or not. So if your parents are paying, you would fill in what the cost is. You talk to them, fill in what the cost is to support you. You want to include your tuition in your annual expenses, clothing, books, transportation. If you have a car, the car note, gas expenses, your insurance expense. And then it asks you to provide an explanation regarding your current financial information or your economic need for employment authorization. Even if you won't use the card to work, you can still put why you need, that you need work authorization so you can support yourself. Because if you're in school, you may want to work during the summer. And most people in college who work during the summer use some of that money to either help with their tuition or help buy books or help to defray some of the expenses that their parents have to cover. So you can just put that here. You don't need to use both of the columns to explain it. You can just, be very succinct and explain it. When I prepare these forms for clients in my office, we never use more than, say, 5 typed lines of the form to explain. All right, now back to the presentation. Now, how do you organize your supporting evidence? It's not only about writing on the forms or completing the forms and submitting them. You also need to assemble all the evidence that shows you're qualified for DACA. I suggest gathering all your evidence using these categories in the presentation to organize your documents, and then either use a tab and write, proof of identity and include, your birth certificate, your passport, any other documents that show who you are under that tab, or just use a blank sheet of paper and write on it, on the front of the paper, proof of identity, and include your proof of identity after it. Proof you came to the US before your 16th birthday. If you came in with a visa, it would be the stamp in your passport or your I-94 card showing the day you entered. If you came in without a visa, it would be maybe your first school records from elementary school that would indicate that. Most people would not have any bills, et cetera, to show, or it could also be your medical records when you went in for your child checkups. So doctor's records, school records would suffice. Proof of immigration status, that would only come into play if you're filing for a renewal of DACA or you came in with a visa. If you did not come in with a visa, you wouldn't have any proof of immigration status. And then if you did serve in the military, you would provide proof of honorably being discharged from the Coast Guard or military. That is usually provided on Form DD 214. All right. Now, in addition to providing any proof of your immigration status, you want to provide proof of your presence in the US on June 15, 2012. Again, that could be school records or doctor's records, anything, you know, that's credible from a third party, meaning you didn't just create it, should help you. But here you might have to get creative and think, if you don't have medical records or school records, if you worked and you have a pay stub, you know, that would suffice too. Proof you continuously resided in the US since June 15, 2007. You would need to organize your proof by year. So if you were in school for several years at a time, you would provide all of your school records for those years. And then you need to provide proof of your student status at the time of requesting DACA. The proof of student status could take several documents, actually. You don't have to currently be in school. So if you're currently in school, then you provide proof of that, of your enrollment and participation. But if you have graduated, you would just supply your high school diploma, college degree, you know, those kinds of documents. And then you want your certified dispositions of any convictions. For that, you would contact the court if you don't already have it. Hopefully, this presentation has helped you understand how to present your DACA application, either an initial or a renewal. Have a good day.